I think the question that people ask me the most, and probably the main reason why I decided to make these videos, is the question, how do I respond when a spiritual leader in my life is abusing their power? And it's not as easy as you might think. Spiritual leaders, and we mean pastors, parents, youth pastors, missionaries, and even husbands towards their wives, hold power to build, fill, protect, provide for the spaces that God has created in which life flows. So that would be families, churches, and organizations that build God's community and carry his word. Spiritual leaders are entrusted to protect and cultivate these life giving spaces. That is what they are authorized to do. So, when spiritual leaders abuse their power by using it for their own purposes, whether that be to build themselves up or to gain power or to control people, the people who are meant to receive from those blessings are hurt. Now, not all hurt counts as abuse. So, we have a whole video on church hurt, and it would be worth kind of just watching that video and learning kind of the difference between hurt in general and specifically abuse. It's pretty predictable that within these spaces of life, there is going to be hurt. And that is because pain and conflict are part of how we learn to live life. And so God allows for a good deal of conflict and pain actually to take place in families and churches and other organizations that bear his name. And that's how we learn things like forgiveness, patience, grace, how to build unity, and just the maturity of being around people that aren't exactly like you or don't agree with you. So, not all hurt is abuse. And we can't assume that just because we're feeling hurt that we have been abused. Of course, that does not change the fact that the devil is going to monopolize on any and all kind of pain to make sure that it sends us far away from God, no matter what its source was or what motivated it. And that's why Jesus gives us clear instructions on how to reconcile with a brother or sister when we're in conflict with them, which really is anyone in the family of God. But what if your brother or sister is also your spiritual leader? Now, all spiritual leaders, even parents and pastors, really are just slightly bigger brothers and sisters in the family of God, who is our Father. So, to be a spiritual leader does not make you higher than someone or better than someone. It just means that God has given you a placement of authority that allows you and authorizes you to lead in order that the communities of life can be built up strong. Even in Old Testament Israel, God's kings were appointed and authorized simply to use their power and their rank and authority to serve the people in God's kingdom, because God really was the true king of Israel. He was giving this authority to humans only so that they could stand and represent his way of leading his sheep, which was as a father, as a good shepherd, and as a benevolent king. It says that he's not supposed to acquire numbers of horses for himself or make the people return to Egypt to get more horses. And so here the king is being commanded and instructed, don't lean back on Egypt. God is your king. God is your strength. And it says that the king is not supposed to take many wives or his heart will be led astray. And that was something that ancient kings commonly did, was to marry women from other nations so that they could build their alliances with those neighboring kingdoms. He's not to accumulate large amounts of silver and gold. What? These are ancient kings. This is what kings do. And yet God's king is to be different than that. It says when he takes the throne, the first thing he's supposed to do is write a copy of the law, which was a reference to the law of Moses, and then have his copy be approved by the Levitical priests. Now, the law is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And this is to show his submission to God. And it says it is to be with him. He's supposed to keep this scroll with him and read it all the days of his life so that he can learn to revere the Lord his God and obey this law. And this is how the kingdom is going to survive and prosper, is if we keep God our king, and if the human king can stay under God's authority and not get so big that he starts to think that he's God. And he's not to consider himself better than his fellow Israelites and turn from the law to the right or to the left. God only asks that his leaders stay under his leadership and care. And that is the best way to lead a group of people into life. God is our Father, God is our husband, Christ is the head of the church, he is the king, he is the good shepherd, and we are all just his children and his sheep and his bride. So, what if your brother or sister who has been given spiritual authority to bless you, whether that be your mother or your father, your pastor, your youth pastor, what if that person is abusing their authority and using their spiritual position to serve themselves? We have to assume that our leaders who claim to know God will have the wisdom and humility to talk through what is hurting our connection to them. However, if a parent or pastor or other spiritual leader pulls rank when you come to them with the Matthew 18 protocol and rejects your attempts to reconcile, that's a warning that they might be thinking wrongly about the power and authority that God's given them. Let's just look really quickly at Matthew 18 so we can see what Jesus says is the proper way forward when we have been hurt by someone else in God's family. It says, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. So that's step one. If they listen to you, you've won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of two or three witnesses. That's step two. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. And the real beauty and goal of this is unity in the family of God. Jesus teaches us how to forgive, how to be patient, and even how to love our enemies or those who we don't consider family. But he also teaches us how to confront abusers. Now, you might think that Jesus' response towards abusers is to try and reconcile, to bring justice, or even maybe to make things right by correcting them. Jesus always stayed directly under God's instructions and authority, and he never did anything that God wasn't telling him to do, and he never didn't do anything that God was telling him to do. Sometimes Jesus responds to spiritual abusers according to God's instructions by defending the weak and rebuking the abusive leaders for taking advantage of those that they were meant to serve and protect. Other times he responds just by letting the abusive power do its thing and then using it as a teaching moment for his disciples. The one thing Jesus never does is react to abusive people with the goal and purpose of demonstrating his superior power, or even that he is the one who's right. He's not there for himself. He's there to bring life to God's people. And that's why he's a good shepherd. He does whatever is good for his sheep. Eventually, this spiritual abuse gets Jesus killed. And Jesus let it happen. He stayed under the authority of God and he let himself get abused to death. Because after asking God about it, he saw that it would lead to eternal life for his sheep. So if we're asking the question, how do I respond to the people that are spiritually abusing me? And if we're going to answer that question according to what we see Jesus doing with those who were abusing their spiritual power, one response that you can pretty much just strike off the list is to engage in a power struggle with people who are abusing their power. Jesus also doesn't seem that burdened with changing the faulty system that the spiritual leaders have set up to bolster their strength and power. There is a demonic element to what they're doing, and Jesus knows it. The strategy that we are given when we're facing anything that is demonically influenced is to entrust yourself to God. So let's look at 1 Peter chapter 2, because there's a lot in this passage. It's kind of a long one, but I'm going to read it all because there's really a lot in here that we can learn from to help us understand how to face spiritual abuse. It says, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority, whether to the emperor as the supreme authority or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. Remember, this is Peter talking. He lived during the time of a very abusive emperor, and he's still telling the church to submit to this authority. That's because he watched Jesus submit to the abusive authorities that came against him. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish people. Live as free people, but do not use your freedom as a cover up for evil. Live as God's slaves. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the family of believers. Fear God. Honor the emperor. Slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only to those who are good and considerate, but also to those who are harsh. For it is commendable if someone bears up under the pain of unjust suffering because they are conscious of God. But how is it to your credit if you receive a beating for doing wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and you endure it, this is commendable before God. Now, I get it. This is the hardest thing in the world to do. As Americans, we are completely unpracticed at facing abuse and injustice like this without retaliating. And yet, God is saying that there is a purpose for it. And when that is our only choice, when the abuser is not listening, this is what we are told to do. That's what Jesus did. To this you were called because Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him who judges justly. Sometimes we picture people, Christians, being burned at the stake or thrown in prison for their faith. And if you're in America, that's probably not happening to you. However, we're told to get ready for this. And the way we get ready for big persecution is through small persecution. So if you're facing what you think is spiritual abuse, and you have tried the Matthew 18 protocol and it has not resulted in reconciliation, instead, the abuse is only getting worse and the power struggle is only increasing, it may be time for you to take a different stance. This is all why it's so important for us to understand the demonic element that is present in spiritual abuse. Knowing that our battle is not against flesh and blood, it's against the rulers and principalities in the heavenly realms. James tells us that when we're in situations like this, that we have no power to overcome, we are to submit ourselves to God. But ultimately, God will have the final word and he will not let the devil overcome you.